South Africa. Hello and thank you for joining us on Africa Live. I am Peninah Karibe, also lined up this hour. The coronavirus pandemic drives Nigeria's inflation rate to its highest level in more than 2 years. And alarm over serious food shortages in the Sahel region if access is not granted to aid groups. We begin in the East Democratic Republic of Congo, where there has been a jailbreak. Armed men have freed at least 900 inmates from the Kangbai Central Prison in the town of Beni. The 2 prisoners were shot dead during the raid. The town mayor said only 100 out of more than 1,000 inmates remained following the assault. The coordinated attack took place in the early hours of Tuesday morning. Mayor Modeste Bakwanamaha said in an Islamist militant group, the Allied Democratic Forces, is responsible. A similar number of inmates escaped when the jail was attacked back in 2017. To Guinea now, when vote counting is still underway after a peaceful presidential election over the weekend, there have been some reports of violence in the aftermath of the polls. Guinea's Electoral Authority has in the meantime dismissed opposition leader Cellou Diallo's claim of victory in Sunday's election.
For the CENI, whether it's by Cellou Diallo or any other candidate who proclaims himself the winner, it is null and void. The CENI is waiting for the results from the Administrative Commission for the centralization of votes. The proclamation, which is official and which is provisionally recognized by the institutions, is the one with the results proclaimed by the CENI Guinea, and after that, the results will be proclaimed by the Constitutional Court.
Egyptian politicians from 12 different parties have formed a coalition ahead of the forthcoming parliamentary polls. The move has formed the country's biggest ever political coalition and includes the pro-government majority party and also opposition leftist and liberal parties. Voting in the parliamentary elections begins on Saturday across the country. CGTN's Adel Mahroui tells us more.
The biggest political party in Egypt is leading a rather surprising initiative ahead of the upcoming parliamentary election. Half of the seats in the parliament this year are going to get voted on through lists. When asked to form its side, Mustaqbal Watan, the strongest advocate for the government and the president, has invited opposition parties to join its list.
We wanted the list to represent all segments of society. There are women, youth running for the first time, experienced politicians. We included almost all active political powers in Egypt. This is not a call for a unified party. Once we're in the parliament, everyone will resume their role to support the state strategy or oppose it. This list is to show belief in Egypt's political life.
Dubbed for the sake of Egypt, the list includes 12 political parties and a coalition of youthful politicians. 3 of these parties are considered to be opposition outfits. To them, this is a pragmatic deal to win more seats in the House of Representatives.
The
offer included some clear guidelines. We are free to choose our candidates. We will get a suitable number of seats. No one will dictate what we do. It is an electoral list, not a political one. So everyone is free to campaign for their beliefs, even if it's against other parties.
2 other lists, all formed from opposition parties, have been rejected during the registration process for the election. This led to critics questioning the authenticity of the parties approved to run alongside the majority party.
Since we accepted that offer, we were concerned in the party that it would affect our perception among the public. Did we change our stance? No. Since the Senate elections, we were the only party to clearly criticize the government and security bodies when violations took place. Since we joined that list, we have released around 15 statements opposing the regime.
Only 4 lists are competing for 284 seats of the parliament, while 4,032 candidates are competing for the same number of seats dedicated to individuals. The list voting is definitely much less competitive. And for those on board with the party that won the majority in the Senate and the previous parliament, their victory appears to be inevitable. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Meanwhile, some analysts are warning that any abrupt withdrawal of American soldiers from Somalia could strengthen al-Shabaab. The militant group has been aiming to dislodge the federal government. CGTN's Abdulaziz Bilu explains how a drawdown will affect the country's newfound stability.
A planned move to withdraw U.S. forces from Somalia has raised concerns among the country's leadership and security experts who have argued against the move. According to reports, U.S. President Donald Trump, who is facing re-election next month, has instructed his top security officials to draft a plan that will likely see up to 700 personnel stationed in the country pulled out. That move is expected to adversely affect the fight against the militant group.
It would have huge security implications on the ground. U.S. forces who were here on the ground were training special forces of Somalia, mentoring them, and in certain cases were conducting joint operations with our special forces.
Joint operations between U.S. forces and Danab, an elite unit of the Somali army, have weakened Al-Shabaab's capability to carry out major strikes in southern Somalia. The country's president, in a Twitter post, has urged his U.S. counterpart to maintain the Somali-U.S. partnership, as it has enabled both countries combat rising insurgency in the Horn of Africa.
U.S. air strikes has been the only lethal component of the war that has had halted Al-Shabaab to advance in many fronts throughout the country. So this will have huge implications to the fight against Al-Shabaab.
In recent years, government forces with support of their U.S. partners have made gains in the Lower Shabelle region, the epicenter of the conflict in southern Somalia. The fall of key strongholds in that region has allowed Mogadishu to experience relative stability for the first time in years. The federal government has in recent months been conducting a complete overhaul of its security sector, integrating clan militias into the army and creating a database for existing troops.
The way forward Somalia is to work on ways that they will not need to depend on foreign forces. That's the objective. But in the short term, we need foreign forces, particularly U.S. forces, to help the Somali security forces to get the capacity and the capability to be able to hold, defend grounds from Al-Shabaab.
Al-Shabaab has killed several American soldiers during security operations targeting the group, as well as attacks on camps. Meanwhile, with both the U.S. and Somali presidents up for re-election, experts say ending more than a decade-long insurgency should remain a top priority for both leaders. Abdulaziz Bilu, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
On to Sudan, where relations appear to be warming up between the North African country and the United States. President Donald Trump says he could soon remove Sudan from the U.S. list of state sponsors of terrorism. He says he will only do so once Khartoum sets aside $335 million for U.S. embassy bombing victims. A Sudanese government source said Khartoum is ready to pay.
Negotiations over a deal to remove Sudan from a list of state sponsors of terrorism have been ongoing for years now. The United States added Sudan to its list in 1993. The U.S. believed Omar al-Bashir's government was supporting militant groups. Additional sanctions have hampered efforts by Sudan's transitional government to revive the economy.
Last year, we started a serious discussion with the American administration to remove Sudan's name from the list of countries sponsoring terrorism. I spent the whole of last year in constant contact with the Sudanese people, telling you that we have come close to this moment, the moment of removing Sudan's name from that list. And today, this was achieved. We were able to reverse these punishments from $10 billion or more to a few hundred million.
On Monday, through a tweet, President Donald Trump signaled that America could lift Sudan from the list, hailing it as a big step for the people of Sudan. U.S.-Sudanese negotiations have focused on compensation that Washington wants Khartoum to pay to victims of al-Qaeda attacks on U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania in 1998. The terror listing has been a major hurdle for Sudan to access foreign financing.
This decision qualifies Sudan to get relief from debt. We are today more than $60 billion in debt. With this decision, doors open that allow for the relief of Sudan's debt.
Many in Sudan feel the decision has been overdue. They say Bashir was removed last year, and Sudan has long cooperated with the United States on counter-terrorism.
The Sudanese people have never supported terrorism. That was something linked to the old regime. We are a peaceful people, and we hope that thanks to your help, Sudan will be removed from that list.
The deal could also set in motion steps by Sudan toward establishing diplomatic relations with Israel, following similar U.S. brokered moves in recent weeks by the UAE and Bahrain. But a key sticking point in talks has been Sudan's insistence that any announcement of Khartoum's delisting not be explicitly linked to normalization with Israel. Re-establishing relations between Israel and another Arab country would give Trump a new diplomatic achievement as he seeks re-election on the 3rd of November. Chom Hono, CGTN.
Meanwhile, an official United Arab Emirates government delegation is heading to Israel for the first time. The two countries are looking to broaden their cooperation after they signed a U.S. brokered deal to normalize relations last month. Israeli officials said the visit would be restricted to the airport due to coronavirus concerns. U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin and Middle East envoy Ari Bakowitz are joining them on the trip. They also accompanied an Israeli delegation to Bahrain on Sunday for a signing ceremony to normalize or formalize ties. Time for us to take a quick break. When we return, alarm raised over serious food shortages in the Sahel region if access is not granted to aid groups. And we'll look at how local innovations continue to play a key role in efforts to contain COVID-19 in South Africa.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo, Juba, Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice. How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
I try to not let it affect me, but there are days when it does. I'm a human being, and to see patients in a hospital bed and their family members are not there, there's no one there to hold their hand, that human touch, you know?
I just hope everyone can remember that the situation is not permanent and that everything will get better eventually.
Now to the state of the pandemic, and the number of coronavirus cases worldwide has hit 40 million. The latest numbers from Johns Hopkins University show surges in parts of Europe and the United States as the Northern Hemisphere heads into winter. Argentina on Monday became the 5th country to see more than 1 million infections, and lockdowns are returning to several parts of the world. As many European countries resort to lockdowns to curb the spread of the coronavirus, some experts are beginning to question whether that strategy is effective. WHO envoy Dr. David Nabarro said that lockdowns should only be used as a last resort. Angela Kupla picks up that story.
South Africa was one of the first countries to impose a strict and complete lockdown to get its healthcare systems prepared and focused on fighting the pandemic.
There are always other options, but the evidence is mounting that it was really effective. When you want to know what's effective, you have to think to yourself, what are we trying to achieve? And the one thing that we really achieved was delaying the epidemic so that we could prepare, and I think it really did that.
The fear of a second wave striking South Africa is lessening, according to some experts.
I think the early evidence is showing that already about 30% of our population have been exposed already. So I don't believe that a second spike is going to be huge as they've seen in Europe and other parts of the world.
Then there is the question of whether people actually gain herd immunity and if that helps tackle the pandemic. There appears to be some evidence worth examining emerging from South Africa.
Herd immunity has never been used for any disease ever. It's used for vaccination of diseases. So you try and reach a level of immunity with vaccination, not with the disease. However, there's a study that was done in Cape Town which shows that 40% of pregnant women and people with HIV had already been infected and didn't know. So what it means is that we are in South Africa, we have a different kind of epidemic, and we are getting towards where herd immunity is possible.
Experts say the South African government can't be faulted for its efforts to fight the pandemic using the lockdown approach, but the economic cost has been huge.
They may have made mistakes, sure, but they were committed to dealing with it. Well, let's see what happens. You know, the 1918 flu, the second wave was worse than the first, so I wouldn't say we passed it.
The health authorities maintain that following 3 simple rules should help to minimize the spread of the virus. Wash your hands, wear a mask, and keep an appropriate distance.
I think if we maintain those measures, we should be able to avoid another lockdown, because I think another strict lockdown would be devastating for South Africa, for the economy.
Authorities are keeping a close eye on that infection rate and those death rates, and any spike could see them retaliate with lockdowns. Hopefully they won't. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Innovation continues to play a key role in South Africa's efforts to tackle the COVID-19 pandemic. Locally made ventilators, for example, helped save many lives when there was a shortage of such equipment internationally. CGTN's Travers Andrews reports on how the country is focusing on improving its local capacity to produce much-needed medical equipment and technology.
Prior to the onset of COVID-19 in the country, South Africa was importing more than 90% of all medical devices. However, since the pandemic hit, the country was forced to build capacity internally. That led to the Ventilator Project, a government-driven initiative to bring stakeholders together to design and build a local non-invasive ventilator. Through those efforts, a live ventilator was created. Now more than 10,000 of them have been sent to public health facilities for use, and the project has been hailed as a huge success.
The South African tech industry was very agile. They jumped on board, people from manufacturing sector, people from aeronautical sector, people from defense, people from chemical engineering, civil engineering, all of them put their capacities together to create solutions. And they were not hesitant to collaborate. That is a key essence of success, especially in a time of pandemic. And South Africans were very collaborative in getting the solution.
The ventilator, though, spurred growth and innovation across the broader biotech value chain, as non-reusable patient circuits also had to be either sourced internationally or locally made. Looking inwards, the capacity was eventually found, and across the sector, more and more companies provided local solutions to the challenges the country faced.
Well, in the health tech space and the biotech space, there's an enormous amount of work that's been going on recently, and a lot of that stimulated through COVID, but a lot of that work was already in play, but just now accelerated with COVID. So pieces of work where we've seen huge gains in the last few months are tracking and recording of people and systems, and that's whether that's for your workplace to support your staff, specifically the frontline workers.
COVID-19 test kits, though, are also playing an important role in surveillance and detection. Cape Biofarms use innovation to plug a gap in the market by turning to a distant relative of the tobacco plant to create fast, affordable antibody tests.
It forced us to develop local capacity, local networks. We connected with local kit manufacturers. We've also been connecting with local universities. So definitely, I think inadvertently, it did cause us to all kind of, look at what we have around us. And we couldn't really rely on imports.
The National Ventilator Project's success has been seen as not just a prime example of what can be achieved when all stakeholders work together, but how it can be adapted by the rest of the continent. If barriers attaining critical medical devices make combating COVID-19 that much more difficult. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
Let's go back to developments in Sudan-US ties. President Donald Trump says he could soon remove Sudan from the US list of state sponsors of terrorism. He says he will only do so once Khartoum sets aside $335 million for US embassy bombing victims. To discuss this further, we are joined live from Egypt's capital, Cairo, by Sarah Kira. She is the political analyst and director of European North Africa Center for Research. Sarah, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. What is the significance of a possible decision to remove Sudan out of the US list of state sponsors of terrorism?
Hello, and thank you for having me. It's very important for Sudan to be lifted off that terrorism list labeled by the US for its integration in the international community and for building up on the transition after the crisis that Sudan has been facing in the past few months. It is of a very big significance to gain back the trust of the international community in Sudan, and first of all, of course, to be lifted of that terror list, because it looks like a bad reputation to Sudan in all the aspects that the state can handle, like economically speaking, politically speaking. So it's very important for Sudan in this transitional period it is going through now to be lifted from that list to go on with and carry on its relations with the rest of the international community.
Now, Sudan is likely to pay over $330 million to have the US approval. Is this an admission of guilt in abating the terror attacks on US embassies in Kenya and Tanzania back in 1998?
Well, it shouldn't be like that. It shouldn't be like that. States are not held responsible of terrorism with its different phenomena. All states in the world have some terrorism elements, have some people who get recruited by terrorism groups. So I don't think that in this case it's a state terrorism, especially that terrorism in itself doesn't still have a definite definition by the UN, for instance, or by the whole of the international community. And if the US is going to hold Sudan responsible for some terrorists with the Sudanese nationalities, I think it will be bad for some superpowers as well. I don't think it should be this way, and I don't think it should be any sense of guilt to Sudan or anything. The thing is that Sudan really needs to be lifted from that list to continue and to fill the aspirations of its people and to get over the crisis. So I think it's accepting to the new terms of the U.S. for that reason.
Now, the compensation, Sarah, to be paid by Sudan is meant for American victims. But what about the Kenyans and Tanzanians that were affected by the twin blasts of the U.S. missions? Is it fair to them?
I don't think it's fair at all. I don't think it's fair at all. You mean the compensation paid to the U.S. by Sudan, right?
Yes, exactly.
And no one mentioned the victims of the two African countries who were, by their role, the true victims of that. First of all, the blasts happened on their soil. And second, the victims of that blasts didn't have anything to do with either politics or any international events going wrong or any terror groups. I think they are the real victims here, the victims of Tanzania and Kenya in those two blasts.
And finally, Sarah, what's the likelihood of Sudan establishing diplomatic relations with Israel after these latest developments?
Of course, it is one of the conditions already, and as well one of the regional trends that's going on lately, and it is one of the U.S. Conditions on Sudan to open diplomatic relations with Israel, to also be lifted. It's not only that the U.S. is monetizing the crisis that Sudan and making use of the crisis that Sudan is facing right now, and it's kind of obliged to be going and taking down that road to have a better future for its people and a better future for the state itself, for the state as an identity in itself. So, of course, it's one of the conditions of the U.S. for Sudan to open diplomatic relations and ties with Israel. And of course, it's on the table and it's obvious and it's one of the conditions. And I think it will be, of course, done. And there's no secret about that.
All right, Sarah, we appreciate those insights. Thank you very much for joining us, Sarah Kira, live for us in Cairo. ECOWAS has dispatched a crisis mission to Cote d'Ivoire to counter rising tensions as election campaigns continue. The tense political climate comes ahead of a presidential election at the end of the month. Joy Kiruki with more details.
The ECOWAS mission came to an end on Monday after a meeting with outgoing President Alassane Ouattara and the three main opposition leaders. Led by the President of the ECOWAS Council of Ministers, Charlie Ayokor Botchway, and Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ghana, the mission aims to contribute to the normal continuation of the electoral process in Cote d'Ivoire.
We engaged political parties, the opposition. We engaged the independent candidate. We also engaged a group of ambassadors, still to find out whether they have any concerns, and also to caution everybody about violence and the need to make sure that this election is held in a very peaceful atmosphere.
Since the opposition's call for civil disobedience, demonstrations have been staged in several towns in the interior of the country and in the capital, Abidjan.
It is really unfortunate that it is always others who come to the rescue of Cote d'Ivoire, and this is a problem that has been going on for 27 years now. ECOWAS will not do things for us because it is up to us, the people of Cote d'Ivoire. It is up to us, political leaders, to show the right path for our country. We need to dialogue, sit down and talk to each other. But why do we find it difficult to understand this?
Despite the ECOWAS mission meeting with the opposition, the demonstrators continue to implement the active boycott launched by the main opposition leaders. Faced with this situation, the ECOWAS mission has launched an appeal to the demonstrators.
To supporters of political parties, please do not allow yourselves to be used to do any acts that are violent, such as blocking roads, such as seizing electoral materials, such as attacking people, because it is not worth it.
A joint mission of ECOWAS, the African Union, and the United Nations visited Abidjan early October to promote a peaceful, transparent, and credible election. The wish of most people in Côte d'Ivoire is that the Ivorian political class will find common ground before the election scheduled for October 31st, 2020. Joy Kiruki Juma, CGTN.
Here now is a reminder of our top stories. Relations appear to be warming up between Sudan and the United States. President Donald Trump says he could soon remove Sudan from the U.S. list of state sponsors of terrorism. He says he will only do so once Khartoum sets aside $335 million for U.S. embassy bombing victims. Egyptian politicians from 12 different parties have formed a coalition ahead of the forthcoming parliamentary polls. The move has formed the country's biggest ever political coalition and includes the pro-government majority party and also opposition leftist and liberal parties. And an official United Arab Emirates government delegation is heading to Israel for the first time. The two countries are looking to broaden their cooperation after they signed a U.S. brokered deal to normalize relations last month. Coming up in business news. The coronavirus pandemic drives Nigeria's inflation rate to its highest level in more than 2 years. And Senegal takes a look at the impact China has had in Africa through FOCAC since its inception 20 years ago.
It's just taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Nigeria's inflation has jumped to its highest rate in more than 2 years. The spike was driven by an increase in food prices worsened by the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic. As CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam reports, the upward trend is hampering the ease of doing business in the country.
13.17%. That's Nigeria's latest inflation rate. Figures from the country's Bureau of Statistics show that it's 0.49% up from 13.22% recorded in August. It's the worst rate the West African nation has recorded in almost 3 years. There's been a surge in the cost of food, commodities and services, and there are indications that it could get even worse.
It's very disturbing. Unfortunately, there is no expectation of lower inflation rate in the coming months, in the coming period. We still expect our inflation rate because parameters for increasing price index has really not changed, even though we have started entering harvest season for most of the farm outputs, particularly rice. The price of inputs might have reduced, but because of other factors. In the coming period, we're expecting higher inflation rate. It's worrisome. It means that the value of money is going down, coupled with what is happening with exchange rate. Doing business will become tougher.
The rising inflation's had an impact on consumers. many of whom are hit by the effect of the COVID-19 lockdown, experiencing job losses, pay cuts, or fixed salaries. Consumers' purchasing power has at the same time been on a decline. Economists fault the government's badly clocked policies.
Recall that many organizations have not fully resumed as we speak today. Many of them still work 3 times a week. Some in Lagos, commercial level of the country, still work 2 times a week. Some are not working fully. As a matter of fact, government is not even opening market fully in most states. So there seems to be confusion around economic policy. And that, of course, will be showing, it's already showing in what exchange rate is. It's showing with high inflation. So with all the policies we've made, we should have seen if inflation is increasing, we should have seen reduction in unemployment.
Government's efforts such as farmers' credit facilities and small business funding targets at reducing inflation. But inconsistency in policy execution has hampered notable progress. Experts are now projecting a recession is inevitable and could extend beyond 2020 as cases of insecurity surge. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
It's been 20 years since the establishment of FOCAC, the Forum of the Cooperation between China and Africa. As the current co-chair of the forum, Senegal is preparing to hold the FOCAC meeting next year in Dakar. Senegal's economic minister shares his opinion on the significance of the FOCAC on the continent. Take a listen.
Since 2000, FOCAC has made it possible to continuously strengthen the friendship between Senegal and China and also bring important results. The volume of our trade has continued to increase since 2000. So in less than 20 years, the volume of trade has multiplied by 20. We went from $10 billion in 2000 to $209 billion in 2019. This is an extremely large increase, and FOCAC has really played a major role in that. And since 2009, China has been Africa's leading trade partner and also the main partner in the context of strategic investments and structuring investments such as ports, power plants, power lines, railways, and other sectors that contribute to Africa's structural catch-up. Africa lags behind in infrastructure and needs massive investment with concessional and semi-concessional financing, and China has therefore played a major role and continues to play a major role. This is appreciated by African states which have privileged relations with China, such as Senegal, for example.
China has recently released its third quarter economic data. It shows continued recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. The world's second biggest economy saw growth of 4.9% between July and September compared to the same quarter last year. A South African offshore investment analyst shares his thoughts on how China is now leading the charge for a global recovery based on its latest gross domestic product data.
That the global markets have definitely, well, especially the US market has overshot and has not been driven anymore by fundamentals. I think the economic growth, like you say, has been quite slow and is actually contracted, but the stock market has gone up a lot. And I think for China, it's not the same case. In China, they've actually had good economic growth and it's picking up fast because our market is a very small market. Our market is about 1% of the total market cap. So from a diversification point of view, it makes a lot of sense for South Africans to invest in other stock markets, in other economies. We believe, for instance, the Chinese market has definitely got great opportunity. I think not just because it's a big economy, but because of the work ethic that Chinese people tend to have, the discipline they've got, the education. So you've got a very well-educated workforce with a motivated and driven. I think that makes a very good investment case for China.
Any wave of COVID-19 infections is bringing more challenges to the aviation sector, and airlines around the world are buckling up for a turbulent few months ahead. CGTN's Trent Murray has more.
Few industries have been hit harder by the COVID-19 pandemic than aviation. Experts are forecasting a 66% drop in passenger numbers for this year. And with a second wave hitting much of Europe and North America, airline chiefs are sounding the alarm.
But I need to be clear that there is a risk that as an industry, we will not see beyond this crisis if we do not first address the issue of how we get people flying again.
Speaking at this year's Airlines 2050 summit, the new CEO of British Airways said mandatory quarantine laws had decimated UK travel demand, pointing to the flag carrier's prestigious London to New York route as just one example.
We need to work together on a testing pilot so flights can start between London and New York, traditionally one of the busiest airline routes in the world. We normally fly to New York up to 12 times a day. It's now twice per day with fewer than 200 passengers most days. I cannot stress more greatly that air connectivity between the UK and USA is fundamental for supporting economic growth and trade on both sides of the Atlantic.
Lawmakers in London say they're listening, but have stopped short of agreeing to a full rollout for pre-flight airport testing.
I know some have promoted the idea that we should test at borders, but had we have done so? But we have not done so, rather, because the Chief Medical Officer has made clear that it wouldn't capture sufficient information on those who are asymptomatically carrying the virus.
This lies in stark contrast to Germany's approach, with Frankfurt, Munich and Hamburg airports all administering thousands of passenger swabs each day, something experts say is helping passengers return to the skies.
The row over testing comes as more and more airlines report major financial difficulties as their planes continue to sit grounded right around the world. And while it will be some time yet before the industry returns to clear skies, there is some hope that months of forced lockdown measures may just fuel a future surge in flight bookings.
Qatar Airways CEO Akbar El-Bakr is particularly confident about the future.
People will want to travel again, experience the world, meet friends and family, as well as business travel restarting. In many ways, the restrictions have made people realize how precarious the ability to travel really is, and was perhaps taken for granted.
But with many borders remaining closed and infections still rising, airlines around the world remain buckled up for a turbulent few months ahead. Trent Murray, CGTN.
China's search engine giant Baidu has rolled out its Apollo Go robotaxi service in Beijing. It allows passengers to take these self-driving cabs without reservation. So what does a driverless taxi look like and how does it feel to take it? Yu Yang has the details.
This is Apollo Go, autonomous driving taxi I've just hailed by my phone. To hail it, all I had to do was click autonomous driving here in the Baidu Maps app, and then choose my starting point and destination. See, to hail Apollo Go. Currently, people in Beijing can only order free test rides at cab ranks only in some high-tech areas of Haidian districts in the west and Yizhuang in the south. And the journey needs to be start and finish at fixed pickup and drop-off sites. So getting into the car, you may find that there indeed somebody is sitting in the driver's seat. But he's not the real driver, he's here for security concerns. Hello, Mr. Guo. 杜师傅您好。所以我们现在能走了吗？ Great, let's start. Now you can see the driver's hands is not touching the steering wheel. A steering wheel is all turning by itself. It's really magic, it's amazing. These robot taxis were co-produced by Chinese artificial intelligence giant Baidu and the car makers Hongqi and Lincoln. And finally, I arrived here at my destination. It's a short journey, but it's very interesting. So how does these robot taxis work? Baidu's experts told us before a driverless car can be allowed to leave the garage, it has to be able to detect its surroundings. A cap-like device on the roof of the car includes laser radar, which is used to detect curbs. Cameras on the car body are used to detect traffic lights and road signs. And sonar is used to find other cars around it. These are the basic conditions needed to keep a driverless car moving. Autonomous driving has become one of the investment priorities for Chinese companies in recent years. And this could also be the driving style of the future. Yu Yang, CGTN, Beijing.
All right, you're watching Africa Live. We're taking a quick break. We'll be right back.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Peninah, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The WFP has been calling for urgent access to be granted to aid groups in the Sahel region. The UN body has warned that without intervention, parts of Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger could be facing catastrophic levels of hunger. CGTN's Joy Kiruki with the details.
Violence and insecurity has forcibly displaced people from across the Sahel. Their numbers have risen from 70,000 2 years ago to nearly 1.6 million currently. Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger are at the front lines of the world's fastest growing displacement crisis. Now they are staring at extreme hunger due to the drought ravaging parts of the Sahel region. Officials from the UN World Food Programme have warned about the lack of access to the affected area.
We expect out of the conference is some firm commitments, some firm political commitments to the region in terms of guaranteeing basic humanitarian access to humanitarian actors. We expect to see a shift in how the international community responds to the Central Sahel. So to move away from what has been a primarily or overly securitized, militarized response to the crisis, and start recognizing that a militarized response to a complex crisis is not going to address the underlying causes of the crisis.
Due to insecurity which has hampered the work of humanitarian groups, many communities are now unable to access life-saving assistance.
So if you compound an already fragile situation, the COVID, exacerbating natural disasters, deteriorating crisis, you see the risks that this region faces for severe humanitarian crisis in the years to come if we don't continue to build on our response, our humanitarian and development assistance.
World Food Programme is also calling for solutions on how to engage with local communities and groups in order to open up safe passageways to deliver aid.
We believe there are about 11,000 people now in phase 5 famine condition, and we don't have access to it. If we can get to them, we can not only save their lives, but we can also change their lives.
The UN is hoping to raise $1 billion for the 3 countries at the epicenter of the humanitarian crisis. Joy Kiruki Juma, CGTN.
In a related development, at least 12 million children across Africa's Central Sahel region have been forced out of school as a result of the coronavirus pandemic, as well as widespread conflict. The Region Refugee Council said children had missed up to 4 months of school across Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger due to COVID-19 restrictions, while over 700,000 could not attend school the entire year due to insecurity in the region. NRC said only 15% of schools in Nigeria have water points, while in Burkina Faso, the lack of rooms increases the risk of COVID-19 transmission. On top of infrastructure challenges, the continuing conflict in the region makes it impossible for many children to get a proper education. As the coronavirus continues to spread, many parents are unable to work regularly due to layoffs and business shutdown. In Kenya, some children in the capital Nairobi have turned to working in quarries and rubbish dumps to help support their families. The United Nations has warned that the COVID-19 pandemic seriously risks setting back gains made in the fight against child labor.
12-year-old Elimanta Mwikali has acquired a new skill since she stopped going to school. This is after the Kenyan government ordered schools shut as part of measures to curb the spread of the coronavirus. Mwikali works at a quarry with her mother Florence Momboa and siblings. The work is back-breaking, risky and dangerous, but the 34-year-old mother says it is the only way for survival.
When we learned that the coronavirus had spread to Kenya, I lost my job. I have to work with them because they need to eat, yet I make little money. When we work as a team, we can make enough money for our breakfast and lunch.
In another part of the capital, Nairobi, 15-year-old Dominic Munyoki and 17-year-old Mohamud Nasur rummage through Kenya's largest landfill, scavenging for scrap metal to sell.
We usually help each other out financially. Now that schools are about to open, he contributes some money that I can use to take so I can pay for his brothers and sisters' school uniforms, books, and school fees.
The UN warns that millions of children are at risk of being forced into labor, and school closures could exacerbate the problem.
Kids are a cheap source of labour, and what this has meant in places like Kenya is that children are out there doing really menial hard tasks. They're in quarries, they're on the streets, they're all the places where children shouldn't actually be. And again, not only are they at risk in those places, but they're mostly at risk that they won't return to school. UNICEF has learnt from things like Ebola, the longer kids are out of school, the more likely for the poorest, yet again the poorest, won't actually return.
UNICEF predicts that the world will see the fast rise in the number of working children since 2000. Chamhono, CGTN.
And coming up in sports, Britain and the US castigate Russia over alleged cyber attacks plan targeting the next Olympic Games.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Britain and the United States have condemned what they claim are malicious cyber attacks orchestrated by Russian military intelligence, including alleged attempts to disrupt next year's Olympic and Paralympic Games in Tokyo. The two countries say the hackers were involved in other attacks, such as the hack of the 2018 Winter Olympics opening ceremony in South Korea, which compromised hundreds of computers. The alleged planned attacks on the 2020 Games are the latest in a string of hacking attempts against the international sporting organizations that Western officials and cybersecurity experts say have been orchestrated by Russia since its doping scandal erupted 5 years ago. Moscow has repeatedly denied the allegations. Japan's chief government spokesman says they will proceed with